Hordes of illegal aliens have decided to demolish sushi restaurants and liberate iPhones from Apple stores in Los Angeles as a very roundabout way of making the case that California is really Mexican territory and that no person is illegal. It's easy to lose sight of the fact that we're not the only country that's experiencing a series of major riots at this exact moment. Over in Northern Ireland, the locals have also been taking to the streets all week. In the small town of Ballymena, a population of roughly 31,000, hundreds of rioters have been throwing Molotov cocktails, launching fireworks, smashing store windows with bricks. And these riots have also spread to places like Belfast. Now, some cars have also been destroyed. Trash cans were set on fire. More than a dozen people, including police officers, have been injured. And even as the police use water cannons to try to disperse the rioters, they keep coming back. On the surface, the mayhem might seem similar to what's happening in Los Angeles. In fact, the non-combatants are using similar tactics. In LA, some people are hanging Mexican flags outside their stores in the hopes of deterring rioters from attacking. And in Northern Ireland, they are hanging British flags. But there's at least one very big difference between these two riots, and you could probably guess the difference based on the flags I just mentioned. In Northern Ireland, they're not rioting to demand open borders. They're not angry that the federal government is enforcing immigration law. On the contrary, they are rioting precisely because the government is not enforcing immigration law. They're tired of the fact that foreign nationals have been allowed into their country with essentially no limitation whatsoever, and their cause gained new urgency over the weekend when two 14-year-old migrant children allegedly attacked a teenage girl in the town and sexually assaulted her. This is just the latest in a string of attacks by so-called, quote-unquote, asylum seekers in Ireland in recent months, and the Irish have had enough. So what exactly can we learn from these two events, which coincidentally are happening at the same time in two very different places? Well, it's easy to condemn violence, but condemning violence doesn't prevent violence from happening in the future. You have to address the underlying cause. And what's happening in Northern Ireland and Los Angeles right now give us a pretty good idea what that underlying cause is. It turns out that when you flood native populations with foreigners, you get violence and dysfunction, one way or another. Either the foreign nationals will wage an explicit war of secession, as they're doing in California, or the foreign nationals will commit so many violent acts of terrorism, including acts of terrorism that destroy the lives of children, that the natives simply can't tolerate it anymore, and then they lash out. And in both cases, we're witnessing the inevitable failure of the cult of diversity. In every case, reality disproves the claim that we hear so often that diversity is our strength. At the moment, Democrats are trying to portray the riots in Los Angeles as anti-ICE protests, but that's not remotely accurate, of course. No sane person believes that it's some great tragedy that ICE is rounding up murderers and sexual abusers. The goal of the riots in LA, very clearly, is to establish the supremacy of one ethnic group over another. That's generally what happens when very different ethnic groups with very different conceptions of acceptable human behavior are forced to live on top of one another. Now, it's become commonplace to hear accusations of bigotry or white supremacy when, you talk like this, but it's essential, especially after what we're seeing in Los Angeles, where store owners are now boarding up their windows at night, to understand that everyone becomes an extremist when they're defending something they actually care about. Why do you think the left is suddenly claiming that Mexico actually owns California? What happened to all the Indian tribes who used to live in California? The ones we've been told are the true owners of all the land in the continent. They got there before the Mexicans, but all of a sudden the Indians' claim to the land doesn't matter. Instead, the president of Mexico's Senate just came out and threatened to seize land from the United States. Now, he's not speaking English, so I'll read from the translation. Quote, "Names don't lie. The most spoken language in Los Angeles is Spanish. The United States government has the right to implement whatever immigration measures it deems appropriate, but they have no right to violate the dignity of immigrants. They have no right to separate families." The politician also said that that he told Trump that Mexico would, quote, "build a wall and pay for it, but will do it according to the 1830 map of Mexico." So now they're celebrating colonialism suddenly. They're saying that because the Spanish colonized Los Angeles and called it part of New Spain back hundreds of years ago and dished out some Spanish names, somehow that's evidence that California currently belongs to Mexico. Never mind the fact that Mexico didn't do anything with California when they briefly owned it independently for around 25 years, as we discussed the other day. Never mind the fact that Americans brought civilization and prosperity to that territory over a period of more than 150 years. The important point for our purposes is to underscore the fact that activists and politicians will use any argument they can think of in order to defend their preferred ethnic group and nationality. They don't care if it's hypocritical. They don't care if it's unfair. They'll do it anyway. And that's why multiculturalism in every context is failing. It's why we're seeing riots everywhere, not just in Ireland and California. Katie Daviscourt at the Post-Millennial shot this footage from Seattle, for example. Rioters are besieging federal buildings, torching American flags, blockading officers, throwing rocks at buildings. Watch.
Washington, ICE out of Washington.
If you want to look out.
Now, as the day went on, the rioters in Seattle shot fireworks directly at officers outside of a federal building, leading to a brawl, which you can see here. And similar violence is on display in many other cities, including Austin, Dallas, New York. You'll notice that most of the mayhem isn't even directed at ICE. For example, in Atlanta, rioters have taken turns destroying police cars and shooting fireworks at officers.